So I've talked about music, I've talked about acuity in people, I've talked a little bit about metaphors for ourselves. I want to apply this idea of acuity now. Instead of to instruments, I want to apply it to cities. And to talk about that, I'll recall my first experience of New York, which was, I think, when I was 17 or so, and I was so wide-eyed and so excited to come here that I was almost incapacitated by enthusiasm when I came out with some other folks to go to an art school from New Mexico where I grew up. And when we first saw the skyline from New Jersey approaching in some kind of horrible jalopy or something, drove across the country, I was so excited, I was bouncing. I think I almost fainted. My favorite thing about New York then and still and always is that when you walk down the sidewalk, this sense of acuity that I was talking about as applied to musical instruments, this ability of the human organism to be sensitive to the limits of reality on occasion, I think that that applies to interpersonal interactions as you're walking on the sidewalk in a place like this, which is unusual. The world is getting to be a place with more and more mega cities that have diverse global populations in them of all sorts of people. But that's a relatively new thing. It used to be that the cities of the world tended to have less diversity than New York anyway. Not all of them, but a lot of towns, at least in a given neighborhood, were not quite so diverse. Coming to New York and having this extraordinary range of people from different walks of life and parts of the world and different, shall we say, cognitive styles, all these incredibly broad ranges of people always right in front of you, it meant something extraordinary because it meant you were always on the knife edge of your own fate. You might connect with somebody who would change your life at any moment. And what I've noticed now, since I'm sort of on the cusp of being an elder, I guess, I turned 51 this week, and which doesn't feel old to me, really. I still feel like I'm not old, but I always tell this story that when I turned 40, it just happened on my 40th birthday, I had to give a lecture at Stanford, and an undergraduate came up to me and said, "Jaron Lanier, you're still alive?" As if I were, some figure from, like some imaginary creature from the Odyssey or something, and so, by Silicon Valley standards, I'm kind of getting to be an elder, I guess. But in what I can say, one thing I've noticed about the Society of New York over the 3 and something decades since I first had experiences here, is that the fates of people in New York are to an extraordinary degree guided by their acuities as they walk down the sidewalk. So many people I know have just encountered others on the sidewalk who turned into their collaborators, their mates, their competitors, their teachers, their goaders, their those who were victorious over them. I've noticed that acuity seems to be more important to people's fate here than, it might be true everywhere, but I haven't felt that sort of web of interpersonal connections as you walk down the street. This sort of extraordinary world of subconscious contact between people is one of the things that we're able to study with virtual reality technology. If you like, you can think of virtual reality as a measurement device where we can do holistic studies of how people perceive the world and interact with it. Prior to virtual reality machines, if you wanted to study something about human cognition or perception, you design an experiment to exclude as much as possible and just have this one little thing. What does this person do if an orange rectangle is presented in their left field of view, or something very narrow. And with virtual reality tools, you can start to do these experiments in which you're controlling the whole thing at once. And you can say, well, we're going to put people in the same virtual environment, the same sequence, but just change a few things. A great example of that kind of work is my friend Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford now, who does the creepiest experiments. He can do something like change the height of your avatar in virtual reality and predict how it will affect your interactions, because it turns out just losing an inch of height actually does change how things come out. I hate those results. I loathe them, but there they are. So, another thing we learned with virtual reality that's really interesting is that do you remember at the start of the talk I was talking about these tiny subconscious motions of the head that are doing the little experiments where you're this little spy submarine? Well, people are intensely sensitive to these little motions in each other. So if you have somebody turn into an avatar in virtual reality, a very poor avatar, maybe, because in the early days they were just awful. They were just a few triangles and plain colors. We couldn't even texture them at first. So very minimal, but we captured those motions, these tiny subtle motions. And just these motions are enough for people to really lock onto each other. There's an enormous amount of emotional communication. People can identify each other and learn a lot about strangers from them. And actually, this data even goes back to before virtual reality with other types of experiments. So we know that there's this huge world of subconscious communication between people, and nobody's really delineated what it is. We know a little bit about it, and there are a lot of people studying it, but we don't really know. We don't have a catalog of all the ways we connect with each other, particularly subconsciously. I don't even think we really have allowed ourselves to be aware of all the ways we connect to each other consciously, if that's a sensible sentence. I think it is. Sometimes this can get tricky. But at any rate, in New York, you walk down the sidewalk, you lock eyes with somebody, and then your life has changed. I noticed very early on that people who live in New York tend to want to succeed because it's such a pain in the butt. It's expensive, it's hard to find a place, there's all these problems. No, it's just a drag. And the benefit is usually, the balance is usually some sort of ambition. I will be an artist, I will be whatever. And I've noticed that the people who were good at connecting in fortuitous ways were the ones who succeeded at their ambitions in New York. That particular thing might happen on a sidewalk, might happen at a party or whatever, but that was the thing that seemed to really run people's fates. And that the people who were crunching really hard on their, what at the time was called a Rolodex, and doing everything right and keeping all their contacts and doing their presentations and doing whatever it is, tended to spin their wheels a lot and kind of try too hard and somehow not move forward. Just a generality. Can't really prove that that's right, but I think it is. So if you like, you can think of New York as an acuity chamber, an acuity amplifier, an acuity network, an acuity house of mirrors. It's a way in which the linkage between our sensitivity to each other is more cleanly linked to our fates than if you're in Omaha or something. I'm sure it always is everywhere, but you don't quite encounter the diversity of people when you're not in one of the global mega cities that has a lot of diversity. Now, at this point, there are a lot of cities that have that quality. Toronto has it, Singapore has it, London has it. It wasn't true pretty recently. It used to be that not too many did. Now it's becoming more and more of a norm around the world, and more people are experiencing that.